On today's podcast, we have longtime treeing walker enthusiast and living legend Donnie Huber. You'll hear his thoughts on what the sport looked like when he was still a lad. We'll also talk about the Hannah's Creek Conservation Club, some of the major hunts they've hosted, and of course we're going to talk about some of those walker hounds that he owned and hunted throughout the years.
You're listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast, celebrating hunting dog heritage, competition, and community. United Kennel Club has been the hunting dog sports home for coonhounds, beagles, retrievers, pointers, cur, feist, and more for over 125 years.
UKC World Hunt here, and I think it was like in 81. Is that the second year they had it?
No, the first World Hunt, UKC World Hunt, was in 1978. So it would have been about that. Would have 81
it was 80
would have
then.
been,
If
80 second.
If the first one was 78 or 79, ours would have been about 80. I was thinking there was only one winner, maybe two, before we held it.
Yeah,
So
I think you had it on the third year.
it was the year that the English female won it.
Oh yeah,
Or not female, male, rooster.
Rooster.
Yeah, it
out
was
of
the year
Kentucky.
he won that. Yeah, what year was that?
I can't tell you, but it was.
It's got to
probably,
be second or third year that they held the UKC World.
I think it was at least probably the third one. You know what? I can't say for sure without looking.
Fred Miller was
Yeah.
over at then
Yeah.
and was down here.
Yeah. Well, hey folks, I am sitting here at the Hannah's Creek Conservation Club in Liberty, Indiana, and I'm talking to a guy that has a lot of knowledge about the club, Mr. Donnie Huber. As we're recording this is the week leading up to Autumn Oaks, and the Hannah's Creek Club has, for the last, I don't know how many years, Donnie, has now held a warm-up hunt. You've held the first one on a Tuesday night.
Yes.
How many years has it been?
Shoot, I don't even remember, but it was the very first year we had them. Reagan Lantern and I kept on UKC to do something on the nights prior to Autumn Oaks because the people were already here and camping, and we thought you might as well have something for them to do because they're trying to go hunting everywhere. So we finally all got together and come up with these warm-up hunts. And I done the master hounds on them for, I don't know, a long time until I finally turned it over to you guys with your reps.
Yeah, now we send the reps to do all three of them on Tuesday,
Yeah.
Wednesday, and Thursday nights. But
And they started out, like you said earlier tonight, I think the first one we only had 32 or 3 dogs or something like that.
I think it was 32 dogs.
Yeah, and it's just kept getting bigger and bigger. And when they got up to 70, we were scrambling for guides. And
Yeah,
then last year we had 98. And
that
this
was a
year,
record for
yeah.
a Tuesday night. Yep.
And then we had 92 tonight, so or 93. I'm
93 tonight. I never would have thought that. It is muggy. We're sitting in my truck out here where we can turn on the air conditioner and had a couple of kids running around the club tonight. Would have been a little noisy, and thought, you know what, let's fire up the truck and the air conditioner and sit out here and talk a little bit. But 88 degrees.
For me.
88 degrees right now still, and it is
was 92
9:45 right now
It
p.m.
was 92 when I got down here. I thought, boy, that's going to hurt our crowd, but it didn't.
That's what I thought too. But yeah, no, you're right. It's been a good been a good day for sure. Hey, Donnie, I think you're the guy. You're one of the elders, so to speak, of the club, I'm sure. But that's what I want to talk about here, at least to start with. Let's talk about the Hannah's Creek Conservation Club. Hannah's Creek. Is there a Hannah's Creek that runs by here somewhere right along the side of the property?
That little creek right there comes right under this little dry bridge and goes right down and feeds the lake, Brookville Lake.
Brookville Lake. Brookville
Yes.
Lake is an area where a lot of folks hunt. It's a wildlife area, I guess, but
It's got 18 miles of lake and timber and crops on both sides of the lake, and if it wasn't for that, we'd have a hard time handling dogs nowadays.
So the club's situated in Liberty, Indiana. We have Autumn Oaks in Richmond, Indiana. It's roughly, what, a half hour, 35 minutes south
Yeah,
of...
it's about 18 miles.
Yeah, just off of Highway 27 But let's dig back into how you were talking about it earlier. You and I were talking, and your dad was involved in getting the club going. Tell us a little bit about the old days and how the conservation club came about here?
Well, my dad and my grandpa and probably about 3 or 4 guys in Liberty that didn't even coon hunt got together, and the gentleman that owned this property, the front part of this building was only about 15 foot deep and about 20 or 30 foot wide, and that's what the club was originally to start with.
Kind of a little lawn shed.
And and what they done, a lot of those guys that weren't coon hunters, they held euchre parties down here. That's why they called it a conservation club rather than a coon club or something like that. But then it got to end up being just about all coon hunters. But the ones that held them, they would come down and work the kitchen when we would put on the coon hunts. And the gentleman that owned this property, his name was Freeman Rutherford. And if you cross this little bridge right behind us, that was all his farm, all the way up through there, both sides of the road. Well, when he passed away, he willed everything west of the creek here up to the blacktop to the Conservation Club.
Oh, yeah.
28 acres.
So that's what you have here still today?
28 acres. And we have about 11 or 12 acre field here that's tillable that we always rent out every year. And Michael Carmack, the member now, he farms it. We let members have it before someone else, but that brings us in a little revenue every year. And like I say, that was just a little block building in the front. And when we started adding on, my dad and my grandpa and those other gentlemen took my grandpa's horses up on this hill behind us here across the creek and drug logs down off of that hill to build the other part they added on here. But since then, we've added block all the way back here. Right now, our building's 101 or 102 feet long and 31 feet wide.
Yeah.
But that was in about 1952 when they actually started this club. And that's as close as I can get on remembering, because I was only 2 years old then.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so how old were you when you first remember coming here to the club?
Well, as long as I could get around and walk, Dad would bring me along, but I started getting he would buy me a membership card when I was about 8 years old, because that's when I was starting to actually coon hunt, where he could drag me along. And as I showed you in there a while ago, I was 8 years old when I won that little trophy. And
Yeah.
I won the cast at the first hunt I was ever in.
Yeah.
And it was the Whitewater Club, which is now the Wayne County Coon Hunters. So that's where I won that at.
Yeah.
And there was some upset gentlemen when I won that cast because they was riding them hard when we got back to the clubhouse.
That thing had some little bit of weight to it too, that little trophy.
That little dog that's on them, I don't know what it's made out of, but it's not plastic like they are nowadays.
Looks like there's a little terrier mix on there or something.
Yeah,
Don't
with
have a
that
tail,
tail.
no tails off of it.
When I used to hunt some, it didn't have tails too.
Yeah. Yeah, that I had my coffee cup next to it. That thing is smaller than the coffee. It wasn't even that tall.
They used to hand those out for cast winners. Everybody that won their cast got one of those little cast winner trophies. And we've done that for years here too, but now everybody's away from all that. But
yeah, so now going back to the early 1950s, that was before there were any UKC hunts, but at that time already they had some competitions, didn't they? They were just grade hunts.
Yeah, they have talked about it different times here. I've seen the time that when you turned off of the highway up here, the trucks would be lined up both sides of that road all the way down to this club.
Really?
For just a grade hunt. They'd be 50, 60 dogs.
Well, I don't know. You probably didn't come out here tonight, but the parking lot was full. Your grassy area out here was full. I didn't go out to the road, but somebody told me, said, have you looked up the road? They're parked down the road, so tonight probably looked a little bit like a regular hunt back in the day, even in the grade hunt days.
And we own that little property across the road there too, just a little corner pie-shaped thing where people park too.
Yeah.
We have hunted at one time when we had what we call the Indiana Spring Classic, is the first weekend of March. I can remember one year on a Saturday night, it's a 2-night hunt, and on Saturday night we hunted 122 dogs out of here. And people were talking about that different times this year when we'd have just a regular little UKC hunt. There'd be 15 to 20 dogs, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, boy, used to you couldn't get in here if you didn't come early.
Yeah. Yeah, you have. It's a really neat club. Really, it's still one of those just good old coon clubs.
It's still pretty family oriented.
It is. It really is. You know, we got kids running around in there, and
my grandkids growed up here hunting in some hunts, and now my great grandkids was down here at our youth hunt that we hold each year in June, and it's good to see the kids here. Though that to me, that's what it's about.
What did those grade hunts look like back in the 50s that you remember as a kid? Did the walkers look like walkers do today, or what? Did they probably didn't? They had more red bones and black and tans were probably more prominent than walkers back in those days.
And walkers to me, clear back in I'm gonna say even the 60s, they were more black and white than they didn't
tricolor.
They didn't have as much brown on them as they do nowadays. They were more black and white looking walker dogs. Some of them had a few ticks, and from the English and that part of it. But
did
black and tans, a lot of times, some of them would be a real good black and tan, but have a blue tick breast.
Oh,
they'd have the ticks and stuff where they'd cross black and tan and blue ticks, and that's what my grandpa and my dad did. My grandpa had a blue tick female, and my dad had a black and tan, which he was mixed. He wasn't full black and tan, but they bred them a lot of times, and there were some good pups out of that crossing.
That's what I was going to ask you. In those grade hunts, did they have a lot of mixed up stuff?
Yeah, but they weren't feist or nothing like that looking, but they were cur dog looking,
More
like some
curish.
of your yellow curs are now. That some of them were built like that, only they weren't yellow. They were the black and tan or the blue tick or the walker mixed in something, and there wasn't any bobtails in them. They were houndy that way, but.
So at this time, we're talking about a time when you're just a young schoolboy at this time, probably 8, 10, 12 years old.
Yeah.
When you'd come to the club, what did the parking lot look like in terms of were they still hauling dogs in cars and trunks and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Looked a lot different, probably.
I remember a lot of cars, and then a lot of people that hunted out of them had station wagons that they hunted, and some of them would have a little box made in the back. But the cars, they just hauled them in the trunk. I remember one gentleman one time, I went hunting with Dad and him. I didn't have a dog. I was probably 8 to 10 years old. And they were hunting out of the trunk. And that guy said, I'm not going to hunt my female very hard. She's due with them pups about any time. Well, about the third drop, we got to hearing some women. We went back and she'd had 2 pups in the trunk of that car. And was still having them, so we brought the other dog up in the back seat with me so she could finish having her pups in the trunk of that car. Now, that's just about unheard of nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, you can't really, nowadays thinking back on that, it'd be hard to kind of picture that, but that's the way it was.
Yeah, they hunted.
Were a lot of those their same car they went to church with the next day, or what?
Some of them were. I mean, that was the only vehicle they had.
My gosh,
I mean,
can
that's
you
why
imagine you getting into where there are skunks and things like that?
It happens, too. That's why I was going to tell you, up there at that same club, that Whitewater Club, later that summer, when I was up there hunting again, I was hunting a little cur dog that Dad had. The first hunt I hunted his good dog, just how I won that cast. That hunt I went up there, that third one, my dog was treed in the bottom of a hollow beech tree. It was really split open. We got him pulled out of there, and they said, well, squeeze down there and see if you can see that coon. So I wiggled, got my shoulders in there, looked up, and there was a skunk spread out in that tree. Wasn't 4 foot over my head, and it sprayed me. Out of there I come, and they had a truck, and they made me ride in the back of the truck. Rest of the night, I quit. I give up on the cast. Man, I was about to throw up. My eyes was burning.
Oh, my.
And when we pulled into the clubhouse, I'll never forget it. we drove past a bunch of guys, and I could hear them holler, "Ooh, somebody's got into a skunk." Dad made me strip down and throw all my clothes in the back of the truck. When I got home, he told my mom, said, "Don't even wash them, throw them things away." I mean, it was bad. And for the longest time, if I was driving down the road and smelled a skunk, you know how you'll smell it, one that's been hit?
Yeah.
I'd just about throw up.
Yeah.
I mean, I could almost taste it in my mouth after that.
Yeah. What was your dad's name?
Howard.
Howard.
But everybody called him Fat.
Okay.
A lot of people didn't even know his first name.
Called him Fat.
Fat Huber. And he even got mail that way before.
No kidding.
Yeah. Of course, that small town, they knew who it was, but he just got that name when he was young and little, and it stuck with him.
Huh.
Everybody called him Fats.
Yeah. Did you have other brothers too, or?
No, I had two older sisters.
Yeah.
I was the youngest in the family and the only boy. And
Yeah.
of course, the sisters always said they spoiled me,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll maybe get that into in another little segment here, more of that. But let's more on the club here. Did they have meetings and things like that in the old days?
We had meetings on Sunday nights. And
Every Sunday night, or what?
no, once a month. Once a month. And then some of them said it was interrupting their church and stuff, so they switched it to a Wednesday night.
Okay.
And we had them once a month. Now, we used to have them regular here, but anymore we've got to where we spread ours out until we have a big hunt and do it there, or maybe that night after everybody's gone and stuff. But
So do you remember when you had your first organized, like a licensed hunt that was licensed through, what would it have been, ACHA maybe, or something? Would that have been the first ones here before UKC, or?
I think our first actual licensed one was a UKC.
Was it? So those first ones were in 1957, so.
I don't remember just when they started, Alan, because like I say, I was still young and hunting a lot of grade hunts too, but I don't remember I know I was telling you earlier, Lee Crawford had a lot to do. Him and Ralph Oler and Bill Stanley, they all lived up around Fountain City and down to Cambridge City there area. They talked them into having them because they all had registered dogs.
Okay.
And most of the people here still had grade dogs. And Dad and them said, well, if we have that, then we can't hunt because ours aren't registered, And then little by little, everybody started getting registered dogs, and that's how it kind of transferred from the grade to the registered.
I got you. You mentioned the name Lee Crawford. That name's synonymous with the Walker Association. Still today, they have the Lee Crawford. They have the sectionals and then the Lee Crawford Invitational.
Yeah.
Well, now, where did Lee live? Lee lived close right here in this area.
Yes, Connorsville is 12 miles west of Liberty, and Lee lived about 4 miles north of Connorsville. You've been to the Milton Club and stayed in Connorsville. Well, about halfway between those two, there's a road that says Bentonville Road.
Okay.
Lee lived, you turn on that road, and he was first farm on the left.
Okay.
So he was about halfway between the Milton Coon Club and Connorsville now.
So if that was the case, he would have been right behind Lester Nance and all those guys. They had some of the first registered walkers.
Yeah.
Oh.
Lee and Laverne Miller and them, like I was telling you, they're kind of, them and the Nance and them they're the foundations of the walkers in this area. I know for sure.
Yeah, there was a couple legends, from early on. Lester Nance. You mentioned Laverne Miller lived up closer to Fort Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
He used to be at one time a member of our club, but. So then at some point you started having licensed hunts. Do you remember any of the first ones? You had licensed and grade hunts that ran in conjunction with each other. Didn't a lot of clubs do that to begin with?
That's what I said earlier when they said, well, we can't hunt. So that's when they decided to have a grade hunt and a registered hunt the same night there. The grade dogs hunt separate from the registered.
Did back in those days, did they have state hunts, or what? Did they have special hunts that were outside of just a regular event? A regular event was a big deal in itself, wasn't it, back in those days?
But I was going to show you that picture in there on that post. We used to have what we called a Tri-County Championship was Fayette County, which is Connorsville. There was a club, Everton Club, and then the Liberty Club, and then the Whitewater Club, which is now Milton Coon Club, is in Wayne County, Richmond. So those 3 counties, each one had a club, and what they would do, they'd keep track of everybody's cast wins all summer long, and at the end of the summer, the top 4 cast winners would go out on a final cast and define the Tri-County champion. And that little cur dog that I got that picture of me in there, I won it 2 years in a row, 1963 and 1964. And they gave me a trophy that was 4 foot tall.
Bigger than you.
Yeah, and man, that was something back then, you know. And I was 13 and 14 years old those 2 years. And that was still great dogs.
Yeah, what did they have hunts just on Saturday nights or just Fridays, or what did that look like?
Most of the time, even when they first started having some registered hunts, most of the hunts were Saturday night only, because you had a lot of people that worked factories and stuff on Fridays nights, second shift, and weren't able to go. They had some. And we even had another thing I was going to touch on. We had buddy hunts. We had a lot of buddy hunts.
Like club and buddy hunts, yeah.
Yeah, where 2 guys would buddy up and the other 2, and they'd make your cast, and you combine your scores or deduct a minus and everything, and whoever comes out with the best score between the 2 of you. You know, you don't ever hear that anymore, you know, nothing. But you couldn't do it in a registered hunt, but...
Yeah, so you're talking the 50s and the 60s and the 70s probably, and then things started looking a little bit different, probably coming about the 80s and 90s, obviously. But
that's when it made a big change. I think myself is from the late 70s to the early 80s. A lot of things changed.
As in how?
The type of hunts you had, the amount of hunts you had, and the buildings we had to keep building on because they were getting bigger and bigger, and we couldn't accommodate the crowds, you know, with the type of building we had. Before this long stretch here was built, this was all grass back here behind the club, which everybody parked there too, but we didn't have the restrooms inside. We had an outside restrooms, you know, until we built this long part on where we could actually put inside bathrooms in. And we done that prior to holding the UKC World, because we put a shower in each one of them and put the men's and women's. The first ones we had was just an outhouse, and it accommodated both men and women.
That was for the World Hunt. Can you imagine that today?
Yeah. Oh man.
But you had the World Hunt was just right here at the club.
Yeah, but we had built this on when we had that. And I forget how many dogs they hunted then, and it was when Fred Miller owned UKC.
He had just come on just before that.
Yeah, and it was like we were talking earlier, either the second or third year that they had a world hunt.
Yeah.
Alan, I know we both have new Dogtra Pathfinder 2s. How are you liking yours so far?
I'm liking it. I've even had the opportunity now to use mine where I didn't have service, where I download the map of that area, and it works flawlessly. Love it.
I agree. I really like my Dogtra Pathfinder 2 as well. I've used it quite a bit the past few months. I really like the crystal clear maps. I like that it doesn't lose service very much, and I don't have many bad things to say about it at all. Dogtra Pathfinder 2, the official GPS collar partner of UKC.
So at that time, where there were state championships already too, probably around that time.
Yeah,
did they have breed hunts back in those days? Were some of the associations having breed day hunts probably too, right?
Not in the early years, but after we had built this up and stuff and started having mainly just registered hunts only, then they did have breed, because we held redbone days here in the late 70s.
Okay.
And it was a huge hunt. I mean, it was a lot of dogs, a lot of people. I mean, they really turned out.
Yeah.
Because most of the times, I think back then, the redbone days was held over in like Pennsylvania area, all up and down that East Coast. And when it got out here, it really drawed a bigger crowd.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then we had held the PKC Nationals, but it was PCA then. It's when Jarvis owned it before they changed it over. We held their Nationals here one year too.
What did those? How were those hunts? Pretty big too early on, or not?
It was pretty good, but it wasn't as big as the UKC World.
Yeah.
Back then, it was Jarvis had been starting it, getting it going, and it was growing, but it wasn't as big as what their Nationals are now.
Yeah. So let's say it's from like mid 70s to mid 80s. As far as like the state of the high, or just is what we would call this region, which would include Indiana and kind of Ohio is just over here to the east. How many clubs would you say were within 100 or 200 mile radius of here?
A
bunch. Were there a bunch already at that time?
Yeah. Even before they'd done the register, there were a lot of clubs holding those great hunts.
Yeah.
I'd say even 50 miles from here in a radius, you probably had 10 or 12 clubs you could have hunted out of.
So who had coonhounds in the 70s and 80s? Were they farmers, farm kids, what? Who?
Mainly.
Mainly?
I think the starting out of the cur dogs and stuff, when they were hunting them, it was mainly farmers and country people, because there wasn't very many city people actually coon hunted back then.
Yeah.
And then it just kept growing and spreading out, and, to where what it is now, with everybody, whether they live in town or suburbs or whatever, the coonhounds, they got their dogs there.
So eventually what segued from hauling their dogs in cars and trunks and things like that to pickup trucks and probably homemade wooden boxes for a while.
Oh, we made our own boxes whenever Dad got trucks and stuff. We thought we was something then,
Yeah.
And then they'd just make them. Some of them would paint them, some of them wouldn't. Some of them look lopsided and wappy-jawed and all that.
Yeah.
And then making them out of the wood, a lot of times the dogs would chew the edges of the doors and all that.
So it was about, what was it, mid-'80s, late 80s, when Mullins was one of the first ones came up with the more modern dog houses.
And Blunt.
Yeah.
Blunt dog boxes was the ones covered with, they were wood, that thin paneling wood covered with aluminum.
Yeah. Had the little
those were really something
top storage, some of them, Yeah, and then kind of moving forward. Then since then, you moving segue into the 90s. See, what year was the first year we had autumn oaks up here in Richmond?
I was trying to think, because I was looking at their plaques here.
I think it was
back.
92. Was it 92?
25 years now.
Yeah, I think it was about 92-ish, somewhere early 90s.
Because I was looking at their plaques at their club here a while back as to how many years, and I can't remember the dates on the years.
So obviously the Hannah's Creek Club is very involved in helping with the guides and all that kind of stuff for Autumn Oaks.
Yeah. At one time in the, I'm going to say, late 70s, we had 75 members here that were coon hunters.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Of
course, it don't matter how many you got about 8 or 10 that do most of the work, but it's that way in any organization. But we did have, I'm going to say, probably one of the largest memberships as far as actual coon hunters belonging to a club back then.
Yeah, that's a big number. It wasn't until the very early 90s that I joined a coon club, which is a Whitley County club, and there we had close to 50 members at one time. They didn't always
real big club.
Yeah, and they didn't always show up. Not everybody showed up at the meetings, but we generally had 30 plus people there in every meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that looked different back then, I remember even in the early 90s still, when we had a hunt, we might not even get to hunt. We had to first make sure we got everybody else in the woods. We had to guide.
Right.
That's what, is that a lot of the members here too? Did all your members always get to hunt, or did they just have to guide? See, back then they had non-hunting judges too.
Mm-hmm. When they had the non-hunting judges, they didn't get to, but when we had one, when they got to where you could be a hunting judge, then the members all would hunt also, and then that major entry bigger too, when they done that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then back then they had those 3-hour hunts too. I mean, now, we're down to an hour on a lot of hunts and stuff, and these guys don't realize we had 3-hour hunts and a non-hunting judge, and that was altogether different story then.
Yeah, it looked totally different.
Mm-hmm.
An all-night affair a lot of times too, probably.
Yeah.
Did they call many timeouts back in those 3-hour hunts or not?
We
really?
did back then because we didn't have this lake at that time. It didn't go well. It went in the early to mid 70s, but prior to that, we just spot hunted everywhere. And I know up your way up there, that's why you guys had a lot of woods that set back in sections,
Oh yeah.
But back then, dogs treed together a lot instead of every one of them being separate when you cut them loose. You could spot hunt, you could call time out and move. And they had that big space on the scorecard where you'd fill that up on timeouts and time in and your amount of time you hunted.
Right to the minute.
And it had to be perfect or that card got thrown out.
You forget about that. That doesn't seem like it wasn't that long ago. That changed about the time I went to UKC.
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah, I've seen cards that had a good score and had to hunt one.
Yeah.
And get thrown out because it was a minute off. They wasn't happy about that.
Yeah. So, but then since then and now today, as far as today, you're still having the club here at Hannah's Creek, very successful. You just go about it different. You probably have to work harder to get than you did in the old days to draw good entries.
Yeah, you do. And you got of course, now you got all this technology on your phones. They know where every hunt's going to be. Back then we made flyers up and posted them all in the grocery stores and the feed stores and all that kind of stuff when we was going to have a hunt.
Yeah.
And they had meat hunts too back then where during kill season they'd weigh the coons, the biggest coon, the smallest coon, that kind of stuff.
Skinning contests.
Yeah. And we had treeing contests right with every hunt. And then that got kind of where people didn't want you to do that, so we just quit it. And the other thing I was going to hit on too, when we were talking about the mid 70s and 80s, when scores were so high at all these major hunts, and I was on the board at the Walker Association when that big 2200 come in, and I wanted to throw the cards out, and they kept telling me we couldn't. I said, boys, you've hunted and I've hunted all of our lives and hunted in 3-hour hunts, and you didn't score them kind of scores. Of course, now that you've went to just a cast win only, have you seen how the scores dropped?
They look different, don't they?
Yeah, you don't have them real big scores now, and it's the same dogs and stuff and people hunting, but when it don't have to have that big score to win, kind of made me wonder.
Yeah.
But that stuff happens,
Yeah. So what do you think is there's a lot of clubs that have not had the success you have had, or the longevity, I guess, just
we've been fortunate on that part, Alan, as far as what helped us is him donating us this ground.
Yeah.
And
you mentioned you have the ground here that you can farm out, and that probably brings in some income.
Whether we have a hunt or not, we've got some income coming in. Plus, we've been fortunate enough to kind of pick through and hold the hunts that have made us money.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, a lot of clubs rely on just their little regular UKC hunts, and with so many hunts out there now, it's hard for a club to survive.
Yeah.
On just trying to live on that alone.
Yeah.
And we got our money ahead when things were going real good, and we've been able to live off of that and the ground rent, and we rent our building out and stuff too, Those are the things there. But still, we've tried to stay with the main hunts that draw the good crowds for the money makers. We'll still hold our other regular ones, but we don't have to live off of them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been 20 years for me that I've kind of been, just because of Autumn Oaks, and working with you guys here with the club. So my experience with you guys has been in the last 20 years. But even today, now I still see a bunch of the same faces that are still here.
Yeah.
And some new ones too,
We've been fortunate enough that with the youth hunts that we held, we've gained probably 4 or 5 youth that have stuck with us and end up joining this club and going on and hunting as adults, you know. But that's the thing, we got to rely on this youth. We got to keep doing stuff to keep them involved, or we're not going to have this down the road.
Kevin Cable's wife, she has done a lot pushing the youth here and has been very successful at it too.
Angie has really, we've just turned it over to her for our youth hunt, and she has really made it grow because she goes around showing everywhere, and she draws all those show people, plus Kevin hunts the hunts, and he's drawn a lot of the hunters too, and between the two of them, they've helped our youth hunt really grow.
Yeah, well, hey, Donnie, I appreciate you. This is a good time coming down here for this hunt tonight and getting the opportunity to sit down and you taking the time to talk about Hannah's Creek a little bit. And I like history too, and it's interesting to, I don't know, just talk to guys about what the hunts looked like back in the old days. And
a lot of these younger guys don't have an idea. I mean, really,
it looked totally different in the 60s and 70s than it does today.
Major changes from the 60s to the 2024s. I mean, that's a lot of years, but I mean, it's a lot of change too.
Yeah, and even just since we talked about Autumn Oaks is just up the road a half hour up in Richmond, started in 92, and even today in 92 to 2022, that's 30 years, and now 32 years.
It don't sound like or seem
no,
like
but even that looks a lot different.
Yes,
same place, but it still looks a lot different.
And I've been all over the country.
It looks the same, but still a lot different.
Right. But you have to. I've been all over the country hunting in hunts, and sometimes just going. And Frank Johnson and I traveled a lot when we were pushing slugger and all that, the Purina races and stuff. I have yet to be at a fairgrounds any nicer than Wayne County.
Yeah.
It is really a nice fairgrounds. It's laid out good. It's got plenty of motels. It's got plenty of eating places, and that's kept that hunt being a family-oriented hunt on Oaks. You get away from places for the family to go do things, and then it's just going to be the guys coming to hunt.
Yeah, and that's one thing, for us, it's good to have clubs like Hannah's Creek that are able to put on the warm-up hunts, and it gives the guys that they come up early in the week. It gives them a legal outlet to hunt legally.
Right.
And not just that, these warm-up hunts are just 1 hour hunts, and on a Tuesday night, first one, nearly have, that close to 100 dogs.
Right.
And everybody wins. It's good for everybody, and I like to see that the club can benefit from it. The hunters do. And
we've been lucky on, we had a lot of members also, but from the Wayne County Club and ours and all that, we ended up putting all them in the woods, and we still had about 8 non-hunting guys left that we could have used. So that's fortunate, that you don't have to scramble looking for a guide at the last minute.
Yeah, well, there's clubs that have come and went over the years, and there's clubs like the Hannah's Creek Club that's kind of stood the test of time, and we're fortunate to have clubs like this still around today to put. If it weren't for the clubs, they're still the backbone of the sport. I don't care what
Yeah, you couldn't put the hunt on without them.
Yep, that's right. Well, Donnie, I appreciate you talking to give us a little insight on the club that you've been a part of for all your life, basically. So, but yeah, and you're still active tonight. You were sitting in there helping take entries and all that good stuff. So
I just wished I could still participate.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing, I'd like to been able to participate the money that's offered in these hunts. Now, when I was being able to hunt and handle, you didn't have that kind of reward for your wins.
Yeah. Well, Donnie Huber, let's talk about you a little bit. Your dad was a coon hunter. You started hunting, you were telling me this story about your first trophy and everything when you were about 8 years old. Do you remember the first hunt you ever hunted a dog in or handled a dog in a night hunt? You remember that hunt?
That was the one I showed.
That was
you.
the one.
My very first hunt, I won my cast, and that was against adults.
Yeah.
It wasn't youth hunts back then.
Didn't have anything
No.
like that. Yeah.
No, that's why them guys all took a riding. Or they took it well, though. I mean, they watched over me, and nobody tried to finagle you or nothing. They let me call my dog. He probably barked more than 3 times before I'd get him struck and that kind of stuff. But, still over and all, the dog did the work and won the cast, actually.
Were there a lot of young boys like that hunting back in those days?
No.
Not really?
Well, there was, but they were teenagers and on up, from teenager on up. But like I say, I was 8 years old. And Dad knew the guys and knew I'd be watched over. Dad didn't even go. He hunted another dog and went in another cast. I mean, you couldn't turn an 8-year-old kid loose with a coon dog nowadays and feel safe, that he's going to make it back.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of good people out there, but there's still some.
Did you always hunt walkers?
In the registered, yeah. Well, Dad would buy and hunt anything. It didn't bother him. He bought a nice English dog in Kentucky. And one year he said once he had him, and he was a good hound, he said, now you're going to hunt English days this year. I said, oh, I guess.
Yeah.
You're footing the bill and doing it. I guess I will. And we got there, and I joined the English Association. He said, you're going to join? I said, yeah, and you got to too, because the owner and handlers got to be in. I said, what's the use of hunting here if we're not eligible to win that English trophy? And we won our cast. We placed, I think, but we didn't have no high score to win the other thing. But he was a good dog.
Yeah.
But he would hunt anything. And once I got started into the walkers, I just got kind of stuck with them. I'd seen things I liked over a cur dog, and I had some pretty good cur dogs. But I mean, there's just that once you get used to a good full-blooded hound, you'll see traits that you couldn't get in the cur dogs. Like the opening quick on the track and that kind of, as far as competition hunting. But the cur dogs were more quiet.
Yeah, pretty much
sneaky,
silent.
Yeah.
Alan, you've been feeding Eukanuba dog feed for a while now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have, and I've really been able to put my beagles to the test, mainly running snowshoe hare up north where they run the hardest, where I put 15, 20, 25 miles on them easily in a day. And I've found that the premium performance sport has really paid dividends. Mainly, I noticed their stamina.
Yeah, same feed that I've been feeding. I think my dog looks good on it. He's really feeling good, and less kennel cleanup for me, so I highly recommend it as well.
Eukanuba, the official performance dog nutrition partner of UKC.
Yeah, so did you always hunt your whole life then pretty much, or was there any time when you didn't hunt?
The only time I didn't was when I went to the Army.
You were in the service for several years.
Well, I went in for basic training and AIT training and stuff, and then came home, and then when I went back, I got into the reserves. I stayed in that for 6 years, which was just once a month and 2 weeks in the summertime, but that was really the only time that I didn't. And my wife can tell you, because when we got married in 1970, Walker Days is on our wedding anniversary weekend.
I've heard you talk about that before. you at the time, you didn't think how that might kind of...
No, I really didn't until after it was over with, and then I kind of explained to her, you know what weekend this is, don't you? And she started going with me some, and all that, but hey, I couldn't have done it without her, because she's never complained about my coon hunting.
Yeah.
And she used to go with me, and when I was an officer and a board director, she went, and helped out with the women. They done the entries and all that for us at the Walker Days. And then her and I run the Lee Crawford and the Walker Yearbook for a few years.
When did you first get involved with the Walker Association?
I first joined in 1970.
Okay.
And
But I mean, as far as like an officer, director.
I'm trying to think what years those were. And I normally got long-term memory. My short memory is what's bad anymore, but I can't remember when I actually took a board director's position. And Alan Snedeker was president.
So it would have probably been in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there.
And he kept on me to come on board with him, so I did. And then he talked me into running for vice president, so I did that. I never did want to tackle the president part, but I'd done directors and vice president and yearbook and Lee Crawford and all that, and I said, that's enough.
That was a lot for the Walker Association.
Yeah. And back then, the first year we done the Lee Crawford, we didn't have no computer. We had to go through everything by hard mail and send notices to the people that were eligible and have their respond back. It was a job until we got a computer. It made it a lot easier, but it was everything just by hand.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the better dogs you had throughout the years.
Well, the very first walker I had, the one I told you was out of Laverne Miller's dog, was in the late 60s, early 70s, right before I was married. I ended up having to sell him because I didn't have insurance when our son was born.
Oh.
So I had to sell the dog and my motorcycle to pay for our son's hospital bill.
Oh, yeah.
It was $600 and something for a birth of a child. And I figured that out, how much that's went up. But I sold the dog in order to pay for that. So I told him it's either that or she's going to have to stay and wash dishes, before she comes home. But we got out of that, and then I ended up getting another one. And
that one was off of Miller's Rock, you said.
Yeah, and then the next one I got was out of Deep River Mike. And I kept him for a good while, and he ended up getting stole right out of my truck right up here in town.
That was kind of a thing back in the day, more so, wasn't it? Dog thieves.
I'm telling you. I've hunted here all my life and never had any trouble. We never locked our trucks or nothing.
Well, raccoon hides were worth so much more back in the days, and
And Lee Crawford had tried to buy him 2 or 3 weeks prior to that, and I didn't sell him. And Lee offered me good money for way back then. And a friend of mine was hunting with me, trying the young dog out of him. And there was a little restaurant in town there that stay open real late at night. Well, we pulled in there about midnight to get something to eat while we were hunting. I just pulled my truck over to the side of the building where I always did. We went in there and ate and come back out, and my tailgate was down and straw was dragged clear out in the street. And I thought, oh, boy. We looked, and they took the old dog and left the young one and drug him out of that truck because that straw was... And it was right under lights right there. I mean, the guy pumped gas at that station, too. Nobody seen nothing. I never did find that dog.
No kidding.
Never did. The only dog I've ever had taken. I never did find him.
Yeah.
And then I bought another young dog, and we started on it, and it was okay, but nothing fancy. And the best one I had was Bally. I bought him in 79 or 80, and he's the one that I've done a lot of. I won the Indiana State Championship and placed 9th in the ACHA World Hunt back when they had 600 dogs entered in that. And he was a high-scoring dog the first 3 out of 4 nights, and he ended up getting taken off a tree. The last cast, the semifinal cast, it was the year the Sandy female, English female, won. And had they not taken him, I was 275 points ahead of anything in the cast. And the hour caught me. And I found him 4 miles, and that was in Van Wert, where it's mile sections.
Van Wert, Ohio.
4 miles from there, treed right alongside the road. And he got taken off a tree that was right by the road and dropped. So that kind of stuff happened a lot, too, off and on back then. But anyhow, I kept him until he died. Then
what was he out of?
He went back to Derrickson singing banjo. His dad was a out of Derrickson singing banjo, so he'd have been a grand pup.
Okay. Was he one that you bought or raised or what?
No, we bought him when he was just under a year old. And a friend of mine that lived down there in Byrdstown, Tennessee, there by Dale Hollow Lake, we used to go down there, and he'd find dogs for us different times, and he told us about this one, and Dad and I went down there and picked him up. We went over, and the guy said, yeah, he's out here somewhere. And Dad said, well, can we look at him? And he said, yeah, and we went outside, and he went to calling him, and he come out from under an old boat he had turned up on his side, just stretched real big. He said he'd been treeing squirrels this morning, and Dad just bought him on the other guy's word. Of course, that back then, he'd give $800 for him, and just
that would have been a lot
of money. And he wasn't quite a year old. I brought him home, started hunting him, finished him on out, and he's probably the best that I actually owned and hunted. And then after he died, I started handling dogs for a few people till I could find something that I wanted. And Billy Stinson contacted me and wanted me to hunt his dog, the one that owned Radar, Stinson's Radar. And this dog was out of him, Stinson's Bobby. I made him a night he had never had any wins, and I hunted him that summer and made him a night champion. And we went to Walker Days at Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He needed one more win to be a grand, and I won it. I placed second or third in the night champion on Friday night, and then I won the night champion the next night, and that finished him out into a grand. And I told him he could take him back home, and he was wanting to breed him some. And then Russell Wagers had just bought Stylish Lipper, and he called me and wanted me to hunt him. So I brought him home and hunted him that winter.
That was a big dog, wasn't it?
He is the biggest dog I've ever had a leash on.
Yeah. And
had the biggest mouth that I've ever heard on any dog I've ever hunted with. Not mine, just any dog I've ever hunted with. There's nothing as loud as that dog. And he didn't tree with a child. He treed right out of his back of his throat. He just kept his mouth open and just kept when he was treating. Never closed his mouth. And you about to stick your head in his mouth. I mean, he was big. That dog, I know he was taller than what they would allow on a bench. I don't know how tall he was, but I had some kennels on concrete, and then I had a couple above ground kennels. And when I first got there, I put him in that above ground kennel. He had to walk around with his head down. He couldn't even raise his head up in that kennel. I had to put him down in the chain link on the ground. My dad said the first night he went with me with him, he was so loud. And back then we hunted little patches and spot woods around, behind people's houses and barns. He said, that dog's going to get you arrested. He said, he's going to wake people up now. He said, I'm telling you, you better watch where you hunt him. But he was a nice hound, and he finished out real good. And then Russell wanted to campaign him, and I said, well, I don't care to do it for a while for you. And he said, but I've got guys wanting to breed to him. And I said, well, I can tell you, I'm not going to do that. I'll do the handling and hunting, but if you're going to breed him, you better take him home. So he took him back home and hunted him. Had a guy finish him out, and then he bred him a lot. But that was a good hand. I liked him. Had a head full of sense. If he's treed across the river or creek, I could holler at him twice. He'd drop right off there and swim right over to you and mind you like a kid.
Oh, yeah.
But I'd say if he ever wanted to get after something, they was in trouble now because he was big.
Were a lot of the dogs bigger back in those days, more so than they are now, you think?
They kept a bigger, houndier frame, I think, in some of the old bloodlines that started. And John Monroe, we bred a female to Fender River Joe once, and Joe was a smaller dog. He wasn't as big as a lot of the other. Dad didn't like a big dog. He was used to them small dogs anyhow. But I think they were houndier and bigger than they are today. Don't you? Really?
I would say
they had like bigger ears, bigger head, just bigger frame dogs back then than they are. They've changed the style of the dogs and everything. But then I handled a couple other dogs for people off and on. You know, I finished 2 or 3 dogs out in a couple of years there for people, you know, the hunts. But I always like to have just one.
Yeah.
If I was going to
concentrate
hunt
on
for
that.
someone, you know, I didn't care to have a young one for myself or them to tag along to help break, but to really concentrate, I just wanted one dog.
Yeah.
I done better that way
What
too.
did you like to hand? Did you like the art of calling dogs and handling dogs? And
Oh
stuff
yeah,
like
I got the fever. I think after that 8-year-old, huh?
Yeah. You were.
It's bad when you win your first one.
Yeah.
You know, but I did. I really liked the competition hunting part of it. I mean, I hunted every night through the week just about. I always tried to take Sunday nights off, maybe sometimes a night through the week, but I worked second shift a lot, and I could hunt a lot by myself. I could get a lot of work done with a dog, but then I hunted with some other people too that worked second. But I just got the bug on the competition for a long time.
Yeah.
I never did get to pull the trigger on an actual world championship. I got close 2 or 3 times, but I never did get to actually win one.
Back what you would call the heyday of handling dogs, were there other guys around here that were like, were there guys you didn't like to draw or that you wanted to beat?
Oh, yeah.
Like who? Anybody we would know? Maybe you don't want to say. Maybe we shouldn't
There
say.
might be 1 or 2 that I wouldn't want to say, but I mean, we had a lot of fun too, like the Jackson brothers, Junior and Doug.
Oh, yeah.
They live
Yeah.
right here
Yeah.
above me, right there
Yeah.
east of Richmond. You know, we always enjoyed drawing each other because we had a good time. We was out to beat each other.
They weren't going to give you nothing, I doubt it.
No, and I didn't expect it. And they knew I wasn't going to give them nothing either. But we had good times. You know, we enjoyed it. And, you know, I enjoyed the handling of them hunts and stuff, and really didn't ever have any trouble with anybody I was hunting for, you know. So they left me alone, done my thing, you know, and all that. And that was the good part when they were footing the bill, you know, and you were getting to do what you enjoyed anyhow.
Yeah.
And then after I kind of quit handling for some of them, then I had people bring me dogs that they just wanted me to hunt them. They didn't want them in the competition, just wanted them hunted. And that kind of helped out, you know, when they was paying me so much a month to hunt for them.
Did you hunt by yourself a lot in those days too? When you were getting a dog ready, you soloed a dog a lot, or
Yeah.
did you put him with other dogs during the week?
Well, I try to mix them up every now and then, but I mean, if I had one that I had some things I wanted to work on, I'd get off to myself and hunt, you know, and you can get more done that way. And, you know, trying to train them, break them off of something or break them to do something, you know, just little things you just try to steer them in the right direction is hard to do.
Yeah.
With company, and they're wanting to turn their dog loose too. But then I'd turn around a couple nights later and go with somebody or a couple of guys. We'd have 2 or 3 dogs. You got to mix them up that way too, because you're going to be in cast. But you can get a lot more done by yourself than you can in a crowd. But
so when did you start kind of breeding dogs a little bit? You kind of got into that a little bit at some point.
I'd bred some of ours, you know, just to our own dogs, or maybe a friend had a dog they'd want to breed to him, but I didn't get serious into it till with Bally, that one I told you I liked her. I had a lot of guys wanting to breed to him after I'd done a lot of winning there, and we bred him to 2 or 3 real good females. He just never did throw nothing close to what he was.
Oh.
You know, I mean, they'd run and tree a coon or something, you know, but they wasn't what you were looking for. So I just quit breeding him. And people would call and say, hey, I'm not breeding him anymore, you know. But it was because I wasn't seeing he wasn't a reproducer, because he was bred to a couple different real good females. And, you know, I just thought, well, I'm not wasting their time or mine, either one. But then when later on I'd bought a dog or 2 Dad and I had from Frank Johnson, and then when I had Seth, Frank was on me to buy him, and I finally sold him to him. I got a pup out of him out of the first litter in the deal also. And then we just kind of started hanging out and hunting some together back and forth. And we finally got hooked up, or him and I were just pushing Seth, and then Slugger was out of Seth. And so
it was when you had Seth is about the time I got to know who Donnie Huber was.
Yeah, he was a grand pup of Sackett Jr.
I thought he had. Yeah.
He was out of the Frankie dog that Frank had up there that he sold to Harley McConnell in North Carolina. The mother to him was Maple Ridge Rudy, a boy Danny Gibson in Georgia, and he'd take turns. She was a real good reproducing female. One time they'd breed her to Sackett Jr., next time they'd breed her to Frankie. Then the next time they'd go back and breed her junior. They just took turn about with it, and Seth was out of the one where they bred her to Frankie. And he was a nice hound. I mean, he was fun to hunt. He was probably as accurate a dog as I'd ever hunted. I mean, he'd either have a coon or a den. And Frank bought him and liked him and started pushing him and bred him and started getting some nice young dogs, and then he ended up getting Slugger. Then I kind of got in with him, and we done a lot of traveling.
Started running the Preener races and stuff like that back in the day.
Yeah, he won it 2 years in a row and won second to third year. He would have been the only dog to ever win it 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
And missed it by just a little, but he done a lot. And it takes a different dog to run a race like that. That's like a triathlon or something, marathon, you know. I mean, people that never had that don't realize how hard that was to win.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to travel different state every weekend just about.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of dogs that are good dogs maybe can't take the hauling. I've seen some dogs that, you know, just didn't haul good. They'd have to be there a day or two to get settled down and all that. And you got to be able to pull in there and unload your dog and go and load him up and take off in the morning, you know.
And not just that, probably, you know, when you come to town with a dog that's won a lot, you kind of got a target on your back. Everybody's trying to beat the good dogs that are coming around or that have the big names and all that.
And there were some of them that run it regular, too, that had a couple other dogs they had in there for blockers.
Yeah. That was a big thing.
They tried to keep you from winning a cast, you know, to keep your points down.
So, but at this time, you guys now had a hired handler too. You weren't doing much of the handling at this point anymore.
No, I didn't handle Slugger. Mark Jones did.
Yeah.
And Frank and I would hunt the young dogs and get them started and sell them. And then I had the females at my house when Frank and I got together, and I was raising the pups. And, of course, I lived on the farm then and back a quarter-mile lane and woods and creek all around me, and I could let them run loose till they was ready to hunt. And, you know, you make as much money that way as you make more, really, than you do breeding.
Yeah.
And we had to have both ends of it. You know, Mark was traveling hunting, and Frank and I were hunting at home. He was hunting young dogs. I was hunting young dogs. And then we'd take a young one to hunt and get a win or two on him and sell him and then start on another one. And we had a lot of fun traveling. We met a lot of people and had a lot of good times.
Seems a lot of years you always made sure you had a litter or two up here at Autumn Oaks.
Yeah, that one year I was worried. I've never done that and never will again. I had 3 females that came in heat within 10 days of one another. I said, Frank, we can't breed all 3 of these. He said, well, sure, we can. I said, look, and we had it figured, you know, Autumn Oaks is going to be the time when they're ready to get moved. And I always like them to have a little size to them. You know, they just look better and sell quicker. Those 3 females, at one time I had 27 pups in 3 litters. 2 litters had 10 each, and one had 7, not counting the dogs 2 dogs I was hunting. I had 30 dogs at my house at one time on the farm, and I thought I was going to go nuts. If them pups heard that back door squeak when I was coming out, they all cut loose at once. You know? I said, I live back a quarter mile, and I'm still going to lose neighbors over this deal. But we took all those pups to Autumn Oaks, and we gave the last one away. We gave it away to a young kid. We sold every one of those pups.
No kidding.
It was while Slugger was hot, and
Yeah.
I'd have never dreamed. I thought we was going to have to take half of them home. I said, we're going to have to find some kids around here before I take all this crew home.
Yeah.
But we did. We sold every pup but one.
Yeah, you always set up under that big old tree over there where Taters sets up now.
That big beech tree had
yeah.
that shade and stuff. I'd
Yeah.
always go up there early, and get set up. And then when they started charging to get in, I'd go up there on Saturday afternoon and park my vehicle in front and take off and go hunting with somebody up in that area. And we'd hunt all night and come back Sunday morning. And then when they'd open the gates to let you in, I'd be first in line to get our spot down there.
Yeah.
Because we moved one year and didn't get that, and there was 2 or 3 people. Autumn Oaks was big then, the crowds. There was a guy that looked for us and never could find us, and he drove right by where we were set up at, but we wasn't in our spot. So it means a lot to be when they know where to look for you at and be there, they can go right to it.
Yeah, so are there any hunts that you remember that you would consider one of your biggest wins? Was it those Prino wins, those Hound of the Year races, or what was it for you?
Well, those meant a lot, but I wasn't doing the hunting in it, so it didn't mean as much.
Mhm.
I mean, it meant a lot to us to win it. Don't get me wrong, Mark done a good job as far as that part. But it's not like you out there getting the win yourself hunting. And, win the Indiana State Championship and high-scoring night champion and 9th place in the ACHA World Hunt was a big win for back then when they hunted 600 dogs they started out with. And then I won 2nd place in the very first Lee Crawford with a friend of mine's female, Bob Kettering. He was down here tonight at the club. 7 Mile Sioux female Bob Kettering owned. I won 2nd, the very first Lee Crawford they had. And she was treed right before the hunt was over. And I had enough points. I said, I'm just not going to tree her. You never know what can happen. I thought this ought to be good enough. I come in, I got beat by 25 or 50 points, and she had a coon.
Yeah.
One of them hindsight deals,
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
won 2nd, and that was still a good honor,
Yeah.
for the first Lee Crawford. Now I placed in it other times, but by pretty well raising Bally and getting that far with him in that world hunt, that was probably one of the bigger ones.
Yeah. Yeah, here a while back, Todd Kellum and Trevor and I did a history of the World Championships, and there's at least once or twice I saw your name on there as one of the judges judging at the World Hunts. And so you've kind of done everything. You've kind of everything involved with the club, involved with association. You hunted as a kid.
Yeah.
And back in the old days, and saw a lot of changes in the world, obviously, and not just that. And you were also a master hounds for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first start doing that? Do you remember?
When we got to taking registered hunts here, we just done the hunts. We didn't have bench shows back then for a long while, and then we had to have a licensed master of hounds. So I went ahead and got my license and started out doing that, and then I was a bench show judge for a long time also, and then I judged the final cast here of the World Hunt when we held the UKC World, and then I judged different times for you guys like Springfield, Tennessee, and another place or two I judged up in Indiana. And that year the one guy come in and requested a different judge.
Yeah.
And he ended up winning it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I told him I'll judge it just like I see it, you know.
Yeah.
He said, well, just so you're not holding nothing against me. And I said, no. I don't work like that, but
Well, I don't know if you know or not, but I know there's a lot of younger guys that have also looked up to you, and I can just even this year sitting at Autumn Oaks, they're sitting at the gate. I heard one of the younger guys that's hunting. Actually, in this hunt tonight, he was talking about Donnie Huber. He said, Donnie was my mentor. I learned a lot from that guy. And he's not the only one. There's a lot of guys in this area that looked up to you over the years. And
Well, I appreciate that.
And I only got to know you kind of since I got used to, or started working at UKC in the last 20 years. But I've also got to know you and always thought the world of you, and always appreciated everything you've helped us out with. And,
Well, that humbles me to know that.
Yeah, and always appreciated it. Not just that, but I'm sure just like you meet a lot of great folks in this sport, and I'm sure you could say the same. But for me, you're one of those guys, and always appreciated everything you brought to the sport. And how old are you now, Donnie?
74.
74. Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried to do things down the line. I mean, my dad and my grandpa both told me, said, you are what your name gives you.
Yeah.
People speak your name, you want it to be good. And you've always tried to do that, or I have, There's times you've made boo-boos here and there, but I mean, I've tried to do it straight as I could, no matter who I drew or no matter who I was judging.
Yeah.
There's people you'd like to do a little something one way or another once in a while, but that's just in the back of your mind. You're really not going to. So.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed, to me, it was an honor for you guys to call and want me to judge. I felt good about that.
Yeah. Hey, I can relate to that. It meant a lot to me. I had the opportunity to judge a couple of big casts and a couple of finals and stuff. And you're right, it does mean a lot. Or I always, and that's what I try to tell guys now. If the club selects you to judge a cast, know that they trust you and they trust you to do it, and that you know the rules and that you'll do it right. And
right.
Take that for what it's intended, and try to do a good job.
Mm-hmm. And like a bigger hunt like this, where so many people are from way away that you may not know, it's hard to pick judges.
It is sometimes, because you're overlooking some good ones too.
Right. And that's why I asked Trevor, I said, we picked the ones that we halfway know. We need about 10 more. Would you care to go through this list? Because I know you've had to deal with all these people. You know who you can trust and who you think's a good judge. And he said, sure. Yeah. So he thumbed through there and picked us out the remaining judges, to where we felt good about who's on there. Yep. And I always like to get our local guys to guide, but I want someone away from here to judge. That way, if this person wins, they win it right and saying, well, he judged and guided both, da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. That kind of gives your club a good name, too. Yeah. If you're trying to make it fair, let him guide, one of you guys judge. Yeah. Because you're all judging it anyhow on these hunting judges. But still, there's, a judge got that card in his hand. He's got control.
He does,
Or he should have.
Yeah, absolutely should have,
But that, that's the best way to try to do that, I always felt. Yeah.
Well, Donnie, I sure appreciate it, and I've enjoyed listening to some of your stories and about your dogs you've had over the years and everything else. So, but
once you get me started, I can talk a long while.
Well, I'm sure we could talk a lot longer.
And we have anytime before, but like I say, it's good to go back over some of that stuff over the years.
Yeah, you mentioned your wife, Lila there. She's always thought the world of her as well. She's helped us out too, taking entries at Autumn Oaks, and
her and Frank's wife, Janet, they took entries for you for a good while at Winter Classic.
They sure did, yeah.
Autumn Oaks.
Yeah.
They enjoyed that too, really, because they got to meet people,
Yeah.
And she said, there's guys come up and spoke to me at the entries, and I couldn't remember them, but she said they knew my name.
Yeah. All right, Donnie. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you letting me do it.
Thank you for listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow so you don't miss any of our new episodes or content.